Last year, I joined a startup company as a software engineer, and it was hands down one of the best decisions I've ever made in my entire life. I think there's too many people caught up on this idea that you have to go work for some massive company in order to matter, because that's literally what the internet says. So I just wanted to share some of the most valuable things that I gained from being part of a smaller company that I think would be a lot more challenging to get at a larger company, because I honestly wouldn't be a fraction of the programmer I am today without having this experience. And I've been a part of some large companies before, and I just personally have not found it to be very fulfilling. However, I do understand that does work for a lot of people. I'm just simply sharing my thoughts. So the main benefit that I experienced working at a startup was that I saw insane growth in my programming abilities in a very short time. When you're at a startup company, your team is definitely a lot smaller than it would be at a larger company. So you're sort of just naturally given a lot more responsibility, and you get to work on really interesting things that would probably be handled by more mid to senior level engineers at larger companies. And I was able to transition from my junior role to a more intermediate role in just a few months. During my first few months, my imposter syndrome was through the roof. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I felt so incompetent. I was just a junior engineer, and I felt like the things they were asking me to do were well beyond my grasp. But this is actually what leads to that massive growth. Growth happens when you do things that you're unqualified to do. And I was in a constant state of doing things that I was unqualified to do. So with the help of your team, you fight through using technologies you haven't used before and building features that you thought were way too complex for you to even touch. And so you just naturally get better and better and better and better. And you honestly blow yourself away with what you can accomplish and what you can build with code. And I wrote a lot of absolutely terrible code, but the large responsibility you have combined with the fast moving nature of the startup leads to incredibly fast growth. I talked to some of my friends at some larger companies, and they say that the tasks that they're given are generally a lot smaller and overall less interesting. And they say that they're not always happy with how fast they're growing. And this is why I think small companies have so much to offer. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch on is how you have an extremely large impact on the company. Because your team is a lot smaller and you have that larger responsibility, things that you're working on and building every single day are critical pieces of the product, and they're things that users are heavily requesting and they actually want and will use. And so this means that you end up writing a lot of high impact code, and you have this creative freedom to give your input on what features should be created and how they should be created, and you actually get to build them and test them out and put them in the hands of users and see how they perform. And this is really fulfilling because it gives you this sense of purpose, because you get to see how the work you're doing actually impacts the end user and the company. And yes, this can be stressful at times, and I pushed a lot of stuff to production that has broke and crashed and it's caused a lot of fires, but I think this is necessary to make you a better developer long term. At a larger company, there definitely isn't as much room for creative freedom, and things are sort of laid out for you. And because your team is just so large, the scope of your tasks tend to be a lot smaller and more surface level, so you don't really get as much exposure to those critical pieces of the code base. And it can be tough to see how you as an individual impact the company as a whole. And you don't necessarily get to see how your work impacts the end user. And those two things for me are really important, and I think they are for a lot of other people as well. So just something to consider. All right, the next thing I want to touch on is that you really learn how to step outside of the mind of an engineer and into the mind of the user and build things that users actually want. I think as engineers, we can sometimes overcomplicate things and think that we're solving the user's problems when we're actually not. At least that's what I've done a bunch. Because at a startup, you're just pumping out code all the time, and you're working on really critical features, and you're putting that code in the hands of users on a very frequent basis. You and your team are getting feedback on those features all the time. And a lot of that feedback is them coming back going like, what? Like, how do you use this thing? Like, this isn't intuitive at all. Like, how do you get that thing to pop up? And this is a really important lesson. And it really just allows you to see the product from the eyes of the user and think, okay, if I was a user, how would I actually see and use this product? And what would solve my problem in the best way? Learning how to implement that feedback to make your code more useful and just figuring out how to think like a user is so valuable, and it'll make you a better engineer, and it'll help you build your own products. At a larger company, there's just generally more distance and people between you and the end user, and things just generally move a lot slower, so you don't necessarily get that rapid feedback, and a lot of that user-based thinking is just taken care of for you by some other massive team that just tells you how to do it. As opposed to a startup, this iteration process combined with having more creative freedom just really helps you gain this business sense and build things that people really want right now. All right, another super valuable thing that I gained that you definitely cannot gain at a larger company is just general startup knowledge completely outside of the area of engineering. So when you work at a startup, you're just more exposed to the business side of the company because you work very closely with the founders day in and day out. So you learn about things like marketing, accounting, and doing things like a cash flow analysis to make sure that the business is actually surviving financially, and just a lot of really good knowledge to learn how a business is actually started and run. You get exposure to venture capital, fundraising, learning how to find and talk to investors. I even had the opportunity to sit in on investor meetings, which was super cool. And these things are so valuable if you fall into the entrepreneurial category and you eventually maybe want to start your own company someday. And even if you're not, it's just really cool to see things outside of engineering and understand that there's a completely other side of the business outside of the software product. I personally am very interested in the entrepreneurial side. And although I still have a lot to learn in those areas, I can definitely say that I'm a lot more equipped now to start my own company, just having been exposed to that and working with the founders day in and day out. And these are just things you can't really get at a larger company. All right, another thing that I want to touch on is that you gain this network of really like-minded people, and you actually build a lot of really close friendships with the people at your startup. So when you work at a startup, a lot of the people there are probably similar to you in some way, shape, or form. They want to grow really fast, or they maybe want to start their own company someday, and you just develop a lot of really quality friendships. And this can definitely happen at large companies too, but I find startups have this unique culture, just solving problems with your team day in and day out, and being involved in the ups and downs of the business together. You just become really close and you develop these friendships that can honestly last a lifetime. And these are people that you could work with or just hang out with for the rest of your life. Maybe in a few years, you guys go off and you start a thing together, like who knows? It's just really cool the types of relationships you develop. All right, I think I'm gonna leave it there. There are a lot more things I could talk about, and there are of course some things more on the financial side, like stock options that could turn into a massive payout someday. But I wanted to focus more on the intangible things in this video to really help those who are considering working for a startup, because I feel like I've gained enough knowledge and confidence to go and start my own company, which is actually something I'm trying to do now. And this is in no way me saying that working for a large company is a bad idea. I understand everyone has different preferences and priorities. I'm just simply sharing my thoughts to highlight that there are a lot of amazing things that these smaller companies have to offer. So I do hope that this has been helpful. Let me know if you've worked for a startup before, and if you have, what the biggest thing you gained from yours is. I plan to make a lot more content on the topic of startups and just software engineering in general. So if that's something that's interesting to you, feel free to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.